All right, I'm going to put up videos on all of the roundtables or discussion groups of the four major networks. Excuse me, in this case it's Fox, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And be honest with you, they're all talking about the same thing. And in my mind, that's pretty unusual. But they're all concentrating on Trump and the convention. So here's the first clip on the Fox Roundtable.
Donald Trump is the Kim Kardashian presidential candidate. He sits on Twitter and makes a lot of noise, but he has no solutions to fixing the problem.
He's really not prepared to be president of the United States.
Well, Ted Cruz and John Kasich piling on Donald Trump after all his recent problems. And it's time now for our Sunday group syndicated columnist, George Will, Julie Pace, who covers the White House and the campaign for the Associated Press, Stephen Dinan of the Washington Times, and Charles Lane from the Washington Post. Julie, you were covering the Trump campaign this week, and I guess the question I have is, are we making too much of his troubles? You look at the delegate count, he's still 273 delegates ahead of Ted Cruz. After Wisconsin, the primaries head to the Northeast, where he should do well. So big picture, how much trouble is he in?
I think that Trump is still in the strongest position of any of these candidates that are left. He's, according to the AP delegate count, he's the only one that can clinch the nomination through the regular voting process. At the same time, he has to do much better than he's been doing in order for that to happen. There is still room for Ted Cruz in particular to go on a good run in the remaining contests and get close to him in the delegate count, which would put us in a contested convention fight. And I think the problem for Trump with what's happened over the last week or so is that while he's been Teflon on a lot of these comments that he's made, politicians tend to get in trouble when they do things that reinforce a negative perception of them. And he did that on two fronts this week. One was highlighting what seems to be a lack of depth on policy with his comments on abortion. And two is highlighting problems that he has with women. And so I think reinforcing both of those negatives could have problems going forward, but it is important when you look at the math to note that he is the only one who can clinch through this regular process.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got a bunch on this topic. Al Blair tweeted, "The issue hurting Trump is really not abortion or women. It's his failure to properly prepare on most substantive matters." And there was this from Barbara Sither on Facebook. "If Trump spent his time thoroughly researching the pro-life principles as well as any other topic instead of tweeting for hours each day, he may not have made these small but cumulative mistakes." George, how do you answer Al and Barbara?
Well, there's a policy dimension and a process dimension to running for president. On the policy side, on abortion, he was asked a question that every novice Republican candidate knows he's going to be asked, and he didn't have an answer. Now, that's partly because he's only been pro-life for about 15 minutes. He's at the end of his 7th decade, and he's just beginning to think about these things. The world needs more nuclear weapons nations. There are sophisticated game theorists who can tell you why there's an argument being made for that. No one thinks that Donald Trump arrived at that conclusion via game theory. Now take the process side. He has been surfing on this wave of free publicity, coming in, holding a big rally, flying away again. Other candidates, particularly Cruz, have a very granular, on-the-ground approach to this. I spent some time in Houston with Jeff Rowe and the others this week.
Campaign manager.
Where they knew that this weekend the center of the political universe was Fargo, North Dakota, where they're selecting 25 uncommitted delegates. But it goes beyond that. They're preparing for the second ballot. They say, okay, you're a Trump delegate bound on the first, maybe second ballot. Afterwards, we want you to have good feelings about this. They know that they want to put in place all the party regulars, people who are delegates, who are county commissioners, sheriffs, all these people who will respond to someone who wants to be a party headed by someone who's been in the party for a while. And then finally, they're stacking the Rules Committee because Rule 40B is going to come up. And when the vote comes to perhaps repeal that, they're going to run into a wall of people sympathetic to Ted Cruz because they're working
And that, of course, is the point, and that's what I was talking about with Reince Priebus, because, yes, they may be legally bound to vote for Trump for the first ballot, some maybe for 2 or 3, but most of them just for the first ballot, and after that they can vote for whomever they want, and if they're basically a Cruz partisan, once they're released legally in the second or third ballot, they're going to go for the person they like, not Donald Trump, who they were supposedly selected, at least in the first ballot, to support.
Okay, I got a question, and nobody seems to be able to address it. That rule 40B that allows your name to be put into nomination for the presidency, but has a requirement of winning the majority. Okay, that's 50%, not a plurality, but the majority of the voters in at least 8 states. If they don't change that rule, that means that Kasich cannot be, his name can't be put into nomination. So my question is, what happens to all of the delegates that are pledged to an individual candidate that can't be placed into nomination? Now, my thinking is they don't get a vote, which obviously isn't right, but then if they do get a vote and they're not allowed to vote for the person that they were supposedly bound to, do they instantly become unbound and then able to vote for whomever they want? Because if that is in fact the case, then either Cruz or Trump should be able to obtain the nomination on the first ballot. Now, obviously, on the second ballot, as delegates become unbound, hell, anybody could be thrown in there. And there's a lot of talk about the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, getting his name thrown in there, even though he has said that he doesn't want to run for the presidency. But if they draft this guy, and with overwhelming numbers like they did when he became Speaker of the House, then all hell is going to break loose, because you're going to have a guy here that didn't win a single vote that's going to be the Republican nominee. Anyway, that's just my question. What happens to those quote-unquote bound delegates that aren't legally able to vote for the candidate that they're bound to? Are they or are they not allowed to move immediately, or do they have to wait?
It's not, of course, just Trump. A pro-Kasich super PAC has started running this ad portraying Ted Cruz as Pinocchio being strangled by his growing nose wrapping around his neck. And while Kasich disavowed that, he went after Cruz himself.
The problem with Senator Cruz is he has no record. His record is shutting down the government and making everybody he works with upset.
Stephen, you know, and this goes back to what I was discussing with Reince Priebus, is the Republican Party, is the GOP headed for a train wreck in Cleveland?
Well, they could be. You know, these conventions, you really, as you said, there are a lot of options, a lot of hypotheticals, and really everything does get on the table because they write the rules for themselves. Having said that, the most important thing going into this is that those areas where Ted Cruz and Donald Trump have common cause, say that Rule 40B to block out another candidate from being entered into nomination, those are the areas where it's least likely you're going to see changes. So Kasich may be on the outside looking in when it comes to something like Rule 40B.
Because that means he couldn't have his name even placed in nomination for the first ballot.
Correct. That's correct. And then, you know, beyond that, you also, it's not just, depending on how they write the rules, what they do with the rules, it could go beyond the first ballot as well. Look, the main issue here is that Ted Cruz, he desperately wants this to be a two-man fight, him versus Donald Trump. His numbers, absolutely, he has gained support from those other people when the other candidates drop out. The problem right now is that with these three candidates, I mean, you look at the first 4 contests we had, you know, Iowa through Nevada, you had Donald Trump got about 33% of the vote there, Ted Cruz got about 21% of the vote, John Kasich got 8% of the vote. Except for the day that you had Ohio voting, John Kasich has never really gotten much beyond that. The other support has actually gone between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, but still, as long as he's getting that 15% or so, you're going to have a 3-man race. The nomination won't be settled before then.
I want to go back to that autopsy that I was talking about with Chairman Priebus, the autopsy after 2012 in which the party studied the problems, why Mitt Romney lost, and said, we've got to reach out to minorities, we've got to reach out to women, we've got to reach out to young people. And then you see the trouble there, and especially that Trump is in. And Ted Cruz also, certainly the fastest voting bloc in America is Hispanics, and he, I would think, is going to have a tough sell with them as well.
Well, the obvious Achilles heel of that new rebranding strategy has turned out to be the GOP primary electorate, which is dominated by the traditional GOP base of older white voters. And it's gotten even worse for them from the point of view of Trump, because what he excites are the most, if you want to say, nationalistic of that segment, the people who are most hostile to all these new voter demographics that they were trying to reach out. So they, from the point of view of that post-2012 autopsy, they've gone in reverse. And they're facing a tremendous problem of rebranding, not just from 2012, but rebranding now from their own primary race in 2016.
Briefly, George, I asked Priebus about this. He says, well, there's a long time between the convention and November. You really think so?
They'll have to set a land speed record for healing to get well with all the people that have been offended by this campaign.
All right.
Listen to George Will, because he's absolutely correct.
We have to take a break here.
Excuse me. Okay, so that's the Fox take, and they're basically saying that GOP convention is going to be a train wreck.